As we saw in the first half of this lecture, 1945 to 1965, abstract expressionism dominated the contemporary art world, discouraging the use of any recognizable images or objects because they were seen as distractions from paint itself. About 40 years after Marcel Duchamp's Fountain, some artists in the mid-1950s wanted to break from the limitations of the current trend. These artists are often referred to as neo-Dadaists or proto-pop artists. Robert Rauschenberg began with paintings that followed the abstract expressionist techniques using drips and gestural elements before incorporating some collage into his work. While collage was still something that other abstract artists used, Rauschenberg pushed the boundaries a little bit further by attaching actual objects to his canvases, creating a unique relationship between found objects. This approach echoed Marcel Duchamp's Fountain. It was a somewhat unruly action in this post-war time, but Rauschenberg said, "I'm not going to follow what everyone else is doing. I'm going to just stick stuff on the canvas," and he developed what became known as a combine. Rebus from 1955 was one of his large paintings that recalled the work of the color field artists. However, instead of traditional techniques, Rauschenberg gathered paint chips like those that are found at Home Depot, and he basically glued them onto his canvas, weaving them together into a rainbow of colors, among other elements. His work absolutely represented a rebellion against abstract expressionism, much like the Manet's challenged those artistic establishments a century earlier. Through his movement called Neo-Dada or Proto-Pop, Rauschenberg asserted his artistic independence from the critics' expectations. His work reflected a media-saturated society. His studio environment was filled with newspapers and magazines, the radio was playing, and television was running. It all deeply influenced his art. Living in a world that was overwhelmed by images, Rauschenberg responded to this through his combines, transforming his visual chaos into art. As mentioned in part 1 of this lecture, Robert Rauschenberg and Cy Twombly were both students at the Black Mountain School. Twombly's work profoundly influenced artists throughout the 1970s, 80s, and 90s. He challenged abstract expressionists who were known for their recognizable signature styles by incorporating a signature style element into his own paintings. While they were not actual signatures, his distinctive swirls and swiggles mimicked handwriting, a deliberate critique of the artistic establishment. Twombly wove words and narratives into his scribbles and gestures, frequently drawing inspiration from ancient Greek mythology. This innovative blend of text and abstract gesture would later influence artists like Jean-Michel Basquiat. Jasper Johns stands out as another prominent neo-Dadaist artist. At first glance, his work might appear to be minimalistic color field paintings. However, instead of using simple geometric forms, he incorporated familiar shapes like numbers and letters. What seems to be a white-on-white canvas was actually painted using numerical or alphabetical forms. When considering non-objective painting with stripes by other artists, Jasper Johns noticed that stripes had already existed in a meaningful way in the American flag, which led him to paint that symbol instead. His American flag paintings reveal an intriguing detail upon closer inspection. They were constructed from newspaper clippings. Johns used encaustic, a technique that was often used in the Middle Ages, combining pigments with wax as a binding agent. He revived this method and merged it with his collage work. Like Robert Rauschenberg, Johns was influenced by the constant stream of media news and radio in his daily life. In his flag paintings, he incorporated newspaper clippings from that day, reflecting contemporary American life, effectively documenting a specific moment in the nation's history. After World War I came Surrealism, where artists created extraordinary works inspired by their unconscious minds. The abstract expressionists followed by declaring, "I could die tomorrow, so I want to make paintings that mark my moment in time." This ABEX movement became dominant in the 1950s, with critics advocating for no image, paint is paint, surface is surface. Then the pop artists emerged. As the signature styles of the 1950s dominated, artists like Rauschenberg began to notice the connection to advertising and media culture, both by responding to it as a critique of those trends and at the same time celebrating it as a throwback to the Dadaists and their ready-mades. This direction led to what we call pop art. Let's start with a funny story about Roy Lichtenstein. He was teaching as an art professor at a college in Ohio where he was making abstract art like everyone else in the 1950s. One day he was at home and his little son came to him and said, "All the kids are making fun of me because they say you're not a real artist, you're just making scribbles and doodles on your canvas and you don't really know how to paint. Can't you be a real artist like Walt Disney?" Well, Lichtenstein felt really bad, so he said to his son, "I'm going to make a painting for you of Mickey Mouse because that's what you want. You want to see that I can actually paint and not just splash paint on a canvas." While Lichtenstein was doing this, playing with this idea, he realized that there was some humor and irony in the abstract art world with its propaganda promoted by critics. Critics and institutions have a huge influence on what's popular and what's considered good art. They promote artists who repeatedly produce one distinctive style, like signing your name over and over again. Lichtenstein played with this concept through his Mickey Mouse paintings and the humorous, "Look, Mickey, I've hooked a big one." This piece is a paradox where Donald Duck hooks himself. The clever comment on the art world's obsession with finding the next big artist, the next big signature style that will command high prices at auction, well, this is all brought into question. While this is a critique of the closed camp in the art world where collectors consistently hunt for the next lucrative signature style, it isn't the main theme in all of Lichtenstein's work, although it was certainly present in this early piece. The paintings were greatly influenced by Lichtenstein's own childhood when he was drawn to various comics. Using this inspiration, he created his own narratives and worlds using his distinctive graphic style. His narratives always had backstories, often related to his own personal life or studio practice. Maybe he became ill and couldn't leave his studio. That implies that he didn't want to meet someone for dinner, right? So this exemplifies the kind of narrative that was part of the invented worlds he created in his creative process. "I don't care, I'd rather drown than call Brad for help" reveals both a superficiality and drama in the complex relationships that he builds in his artwork. That makes his approach fascinating in how these paintings relate to abstract art, employing bold gestures and vibrant colors with simplicity that was more familiar in popular culture. This image shows Andy Warhol and Edie Sedgwick, who was the it girl at the time and unfortunately died tragically young. Similar to the anti-establishment movements of earlier generations, pop artists were not interested in the critics' opinions about the right way to make art. In response to Clement Greenberg's paint is paint, surface is surface philosophy, and other theorists emerged, people like Susan Sontag, who wrote Notes on Camp. This text specifically referred to things that exist on the surface with the degree of intentional artifice and exaggeration. The idea of camp is somewhat ironic. It doesn't take things as seriously, accepting them at the surface of it rather than searching for deeper meanings. This approach perfectly describes what Andy Warhol did with much of his work, where he took objects from everyday life as subjects. This was his motivation. He claimed that you only need to look at the surface to understand his work. There's no need to look deeper. That's it. There's no hidden depth because it's intentionally superficial. Warhol pushed back against established critics by asserting that everyday life was pop art's greatest influence. In the late 1950s and early 1960s, society shifted towards a widespread commodification and commercialization, with marketing becoming dominant in everyday life. Warhol incorporated this graphic design sensibility into his creative process. After college, he worked as an illustrator and graphic designer when he first moved to New York. Much of his work featured repetition of motifs, a technique very common in advertising. What's the difference between an artist painting a traditional still life of fruit and one who uses soap pads or soup cans as a subject? Warhol would create installations where the line between commercial products and art became deliberately blurred. His work played with the concept of ready-made objects, found objects, and the Magritte's famous "this is not a pipe" notion. The philosopher Arthur Danto wrote in The Transfiguration of the Commonplace about how everyday objects can be transformed into art. How do we trust or believe that something is more than just an object? Art involves a significant amount of belief and trust. Perhaps it's ultimately about how your perspectives are being shifted, offering you a new point of view. In addition to grocery store items, Warhol also referenced celebrities from contemporary culture found in tabloids. Newspapers and media objectify these figures, driven by market branding. Elvis was primarily a singer, not a cowboy or a movie star, yet appeared in numerous films. This overlap was designed to sell more than just music. Warhol's Double Elvis was painted on a silver-grounded canvas, while his Marilyn Monroe portrait was rendered in gold, days after her death in 1962. Compared to abstract expressionism, Warhol's approach differed in three ways. He used representational images, he employed screen printing techniques that created flat rather than drippy gestural applications of paint, and he utilized colors like silver and gold. Warhol's upbringing in the Byzantine Catholic Church, with its gold-painted icons and shiny metallic colors, greatly influenced his aesthetic. Through his art, he elevated pop culture figures to iconic status, with a direct parallel to these religious icons of his youth that informed his creative process. Warhol also took materials directly from newspapers, focusing on current events and topics of public debate in the spirit of the time. For example, he featured Jackie Kennedy in images from both JFK's inauguration and a couple of years later at the president's funeral. Placed side by side, these works reflect on us as a culture, how we are informed and influenced by media sources. His other paintings include images of race riots, and he created a series based on the electric chair. The artist's relationship with their worlds blend and merge through profound influences from advertising, marketing, and media imagery. This marked a shift from expressive gestural materials toward a flat printed surface that reflect consumer culture's flatness. The early 1960s witnessed major events. The implementation of the Civil Rights Act, the start of the Vietnam War, the construction of the Berlin Wall, Kennedy's assassination, and the dawn of space exploration. These events would shape the art created throughout the 1960s and 70s and the topics of our next lecture.